Hello there, my name is Highland, and I love interesting photography facts. When I hear a good photography fact, I go, that's a good fact. But when I learned this most recent fact about Ansel Adams, I didn't go, I went,
Wow.
A little bit of context, I recently made a video about Ansel Adams, which required a bit of research. I read his biography, and I also read some articles about him. And he's truly a fascinating guy. I think you should learn more about him if you're into photography. But during this research, I started to notice a pattern. Every piece of writing about Ansel would also mention his basketball shoes. Reading about his early life, his biography stated that he always wore basketball shoes. It mentions them several times, actually. And when he got married to his wife of 58 years, Virginia Best, who can be seen here
Petting a live bear.
she was also a very interesting person who you should learn more about. When the two got married, Adams wore knickers, a coat and a tie, and his basketball shoes on his wedding day. Now, I thought this was innocent enough on the surface. The man wanted to style. So in the 1920s, he went to the shoe store, got the freshest pair of Jordans off the shelf, and wore them out. I can completely understand that. And then it went deeper. In the month of April 1927, Adams took what is arguably one of his most famous photos. I have a video about this exact photo on my channel. It's the monolith face of Half Dome. And to take this photo, Adams had to literally scale a mountain in windy conditions with snow on the ground. And you can guess his hiking party wore hiking boots, and Adams wore, you guessed it, his basketball shoes. And this is documented on the Ansel Adams website. It's like proudly quoted. And I just didn't know what to make of it. I really didn't. Something doesn't add up. See, Adams is well documented as having loved the outdoors. The man was a landscape photographer, for God's sakes. And you think for that lifestyle, he would need something a little more all-terrain, something to handle the weather, like some boots or something. So I wanted to know, out of all the things known about Ansel Adams, out of all the things mentioned, why is nobody talking about the fact that he always wore basketball shoes? So I wanted to get to the bottom of that. And to do so, I had to learn more about basketball in the 1920s. In the 1920s, basketball was very different from the sport we watch today. Spelled as two words, basket ball, until the 1930s. The sport was much more casual and unorganized than it is today, partially because it was just invented some 20 odd years ago. While most people understood the core concepts of ball go in hoop, they were still trying to nail down some of the core aspects of the game, like how many points you got when you made a basket, or what a free throw was, or even how big the courts should be. And speaking of the courts, sometimes the game wasn't even played on concrete, it was just played on packed dirt or grass, which caused the game to have a greater focus on passing and shooting than... The equipment also obviously looked a little different. In the late 1910s, they adopted nets on the rim instead of shooting into a bucket. I bet that was popular at the local basketball club. Also, the ball more closely resembled some sort of spherical leather football instead of a regular basketball we see today. Now, because the sport was still finding its footing and the courts would vary from place to place, the basketball shoes of the time were more designed as just general athletic shoes. Like when they were designed, they were just kind of made as good all-around shoes, you know? In an article on early basketball from the National Geographic, the shoes were described as hand-stitched from some of the strongest, yet softest, most flexible materials available. I even found this old advertisement that shows the shoes having cleats or some sort of spikes in the bottom to give you more traction. Overall, from my research on shoes of the time, I found that they generally lacked specialization of any kind. For example, their basketball shoes were just general athletic shoes that happened to have some other benefits for people who wanted to use them outside. But to truly understand Ansel's obsession about basketball shoes, we also have to look at what else was available at the time. Now, I'm not a vintage shoe expert, and admittedly the research I did here was relatively brief and can only be applied to shoes in the southern United States in the 1920s, but here's what I found. I found two types of shoe alternatives, which I will call businessy shoes and outdoorsy shoes. Businessy shoes were for people in industry, professionals. Henry, how is your business going? Great, Todd. Thanks to my business shoes. See, for these options, you had your classic Oxfords and wing tips. These could range in price from the shoes you wore every day to the ones you only wore on special occasions.
Wow.
They were mostly made of leather and came in a variety of stitch patterns. They were thin, and if you wore them for playing sports, you were probably white. And if you wore them for playing sports, you were probably playing golf or tennis. Next are the outdoorsy shoes, which were boots. Yeah, they were just boots. Having been around a long time, the work boot was very popular. They are made of heavy, thick materials. You could get them in a steel toe or a waterproof rubberized liner. There were also hiking variations with deeper tread and thicker soles to make walking more comfortable, and also to fight against stones and nails puncturing your foot when you stepped on them. So the problem that I found with these was that the line between work boots, or the type of shoe you would wear when you're on a construction site, and hiking boots, the type you would wear when you're climbing a mountain, the line between them was quite vague, which means that it was more just a general utility boot than anything else. This obviously wouldn't be as suited to Ansel's lifestyle, as he enjoyed quick travels, day hikes, and moving around. So when he had to choose between the two, outdoorsy and basketball shoes, he was choosing between a heavier, albeit more durable shoe, and something lighter, more performance-oriented that came with some of the benefits of being outdoorsy, like flexible materials and the tread. It was really a no-brainer for Adams to make the decision that he did. And obviously Adams wasn't always just clinging to the side of a mountain or something. Like he wanted shoes for everyday life as a landscape photographer, and just seems like basketball shoes were the right fit. Like they seemed to work. I mean, sure, they definitely weren't as durable as hiking boots, but the man was Ansel Adams. He can afford to replace his shoes every couple of months. So that's the conclusion that I have come to, is that Ansel Adams wore basketball shoes for the majority of his early life and professional career because they simply were the best choice of shoe for him. Ansel traveled all over the United States capturing images for his own portfolio and the National Park Service. And throughout that time, people have always asked, what kind of camera did he use to take those brilliant images? And that's all well and good, but I'm glad we can finally answer the question as to what kind of shoes he was wearing when he was taking those photos and why. Honestly, I think the thing I'm surprised about is just how well documented this seemingly negligible fact is about his life, that he always wore basketball shoes. It's everywhere. So people who write about Ansel Adams must also have this curiosity about his footwear. On a side note, I actually found a relatively new American shoemaker who made a hiking boot and called it Ansel, after Ansel Adams. And I think what's curious about it is that it bears a pretty close resemblance to the type of shoe that Ansel would have been wearing as a basketball shoe in the early 20s. It's close, it's definitely more modern. They call it an ultralight hiking boot.
I get you now, Ansel. I understand you.
You were so ahead of the times, so stylish, yet so practical. But I'll tell you what irks me. What irks me is that throughout all this research, combing Ansel's portfolio throughout the years, I could not find one single photograph of Ansel Adams actually playing basketball. Not one. I didn't get one photo of him balling, actually using the shoes for what they were designed to be used for. I mean, sure, I found this adorable photo of older Ansel Adams dressed up as a baseball catcher, and of course he had taken photos of people playing basketball in the past, but nothing about him actually playing basketball, and that disappoints me.